This is a paper entitled Rewarding the Extreme, Market Reactions to American Corporations' LGBTQ Positions. And this kind of gives the punch of what the paper is about. The question is, do markets, our research question, do markets, what are the performance implications for firms taking an extreme position, so a credible, authentic position on a social issue? Now, I can't see your faces because you're all you all muted your video, but you probably all look very surprised because we know the answer to this, right? We know that if you are very authentically take a position that is aligned with stakeholders who care about that position. So in this picture, in this slide here, you see companies that received a perfect score for being 100% pro-gay on LGBTQ diversity from the Human Rights Campaign. They receive an award for being best employer for LGBTQ. And we know that these things kind of tend to be associated with good performance, right? Especially if these things are authentic. This is a third party that audits these companies. We know that they actually put their money where their mouth is. Their HR policies are aligned with this. So we expect that indeed the performance implications of taking this position would be positive. What we want to ask though is, what are the performance implications for firms that take an extreme position, but just the other extreme? So instead of receiving 100%, instead of being the best employer for LGBTQ diversity, these are the worst employers for LGBTQ diversity. So these are companies that were named in the same report, the Human Rights Campaign in 2013, for being the least pro-gay or the most anti-gay companies in the US. ExxonMobil, you see on the left here, Exxon merged with Mobil, and when Exxon merged with Mobil, they went through the HR policy book of Mobil and scraped every mention of domestic partner benefits. So employees of Mobil, if they were same-sex domestic partners, could go to the company gym. Actually, I'm not sure they had a company gym, but could have the health insurance. Once the merger was finalized, they could not. And consistently resisted having HR policies that would equate domestic partner benefits with benefits from married couple. They consistently resisted having those on the book. So we're asking, what is the performance implication of this? And I'm going to go through a very simple exercise of, well, theory building. I'm going to show you two fairly uncontested observations from the literature. The first would be from the CSR literature. You're not going to contest it at all, I'm sure. The second would be from the sociology literature. Then I'm going to derive a testable hypothesis. I'm going to test it using a financial event study. What I'm not going to do is explain what a financial event study is because, well, all of you know it. Olga is probably much better than me in explaining it, and I only have 20 minutes. And then I'm going to show you some graphs just to drive the point home. All right, the two observations that I'm going to make. The first observation is that people, we're going to call them stakeholders, reward firms when these firms support the position if they care about the position. So these are a bunch of people who blocked traffic in London last year because Extinction Rebellion. So you remember before the pandemic, we really, the environment was I guess it's still very important, but these young people were very, cared a lot about it. So the idea is that if you care a lot about the environment, and there's a company that signals that they are really also on your side in caring for the environment, then you're going to get lots of, this is going to help you financially. And Caroline, who's I hope listening, has some papers on this, very, very believable papers. This seems to help. It seems to help. I'm going to go through this quickly. This is how I do it for my MBA class. So how does it help? Well, we know there's a bit of literature that if you are aligned with a position that stakeholders care about, you can charge slightly higher prices. There's a lot of research showing that employees would love you, and actually Christiane has papers on this. Employee turnover will go down, employee productivity will go up, they're gonna ask for lower wages, think Patagonia, right? So you come to London Business School, this is your MBA, charge higher prices, have lower costs than your competitors, you're gonna be more profitable. Right? So the first observation I was going to make is that people, stakeholders, seem to reward firms when these firms support their values, meaning these would be more profitable. The second observation comes from about 3 decades of research in sociology, and it's that people don't agree on what's the right thing to do given certain values. So the US has traditionally hot button issues. These include climate change, migration, gun laws, gay rights, abortion. Race used to be a big issue. And the thing about these issues is that, yes, people care about them very, very much, but people also strongly disagree. So on the left, you see a demonstration from the Human Rights Campaign saying we need more protection for homosexual couples. On the right, you see a demonstration. I forgot which organization organized it. These constantly elude my memory, but you see a demonstration that was actually about the same laws saying, no, we should not have them on the books. So these issues are politicized and to a large extent, very polarizing. They're issues that people care about, but they strongly disagree. Okay, take these 2 observations. People really reward firms when they align with their values, and for some issues, people don't agree on the values. And what you get is a prediction that some firms might benefit from supporting the other values, the values that the firms that receive a 0 on being pro-LGBT. How do we test this? We test this using a financial event study. We look at the cumulative of normal return. What do you need to, I simplified this. We look at the stock price of firms on the day that the index is announced, assuming that there's new information in this index. If investors think that a certain score, be it 100, a 70, or a 0, is good, you're going to see an increase in the abnormal increase in the stock price of the company on that day. If they think it's a bad position for future profits, you're going to see a decrease, right? This is, I'm used to like people, seeing people and nodding. I think this is sufficient. So our testable hypothesis will be, we'll have 2, that investors will react positively for firms receiving the highest score in the index. The index is named best employer for LGBT. So we actually know there is research on indices of best employers, and we know to expect hypothesis A, right? If you receive an award for being the best employer, market seems to think that this is going to help you in the future. Alex Seidman says some papers on this. It's a fairly uncontested observation. Hypothesis B is that investors would actually react positive for firms that receive extremely low score on this index, extremely low, as in like 0. And this comes directly from our theory that there is a significant minority of stakeholders who actually value that position enough to reward firms. What we use is this Human Rights Campaign Equality Index that I mentioned earlier. It's an index that's released annually. It rates the largest American companies on their LGBTQ performance. We collect the data for the entire panel, which is 2002 to 2018. Over the years, there's about 1,000 firms. Some of them are private, some of them are public. We can only use the event study for public firms. And what we collect is the actual score of LGBTQ performance. I'll explain what it means in a minute from the HRC. We also look at where these firms are located and where they have most of their business from the HRC, and we do a web search on each company. Then we merge it with some data from CompuStat and Eventus. I can talk more about this if you want. Let me show you what the core data actually looks like. So the HRC has criteria, 5. I put 2 on the screen so you'd see what it looks like. The HRC has employees who go through the HR policies of firms, and for example, look at criteria 1. This is from 2016. Equal employment opportunity policies. 1A, include sexual orientation for all operations. So the HRC people go over the HR books of a company, and if a company has an equal employment opportunity policy that includes the word sexual orientation, then these, they receive 15 points. If not, they don't, and so on, right? What it ends up looking like, sorry, I got distracted by the chat. What it ends up looking like is this. You have companies, and for each company, you have a score. Okay? And the score is composed with all of the components and how much you received on those components. So Dow Chemicals received 100 and Dr. Horton received a 20. Dr. Horton is in gray because they had to be audited. They did not submit their HR books. They had to retrieve the HR books. So they're actually quite diligent, these people from the Human Rights Campaign. So this is what it looks like. If you plot the distribution of firms from firms that receive a 0 to firms that receive 100, this is what it looks like on average across the years. Very few companies receive very low scores, and a lot of companies, actually most companies, receive very high scores, right? So what you see here is a kernel density smooth distribution. Think of it as a histogram of how many companies are in each bucket, right? So the first observation that you see is that this is not a smooth, all right? This is it's a bit bifurcated. We want to look at the investor reaction, right? If you want to look at investor reaction, you want some basic conditions. The index is released on November 9th. It's being re-released on the same day by the companies that are being ranked, by business news like Business Wire, Bloomberg, and so on. And there are other conditions. Olga can talk more. There are other conditions that make us fairly confident we can use an event study to study this question. So the reveal. What we do is we split the distribution, we split the companies to companies that receive very low scores, 25 or lower, and then in quartiles, companies that receive a score of 25 to 50, 50 to 75, 75 to 99, and then the companies that actually receive 100. So this is, and for each of these buckets, we test what is the cumulative abnormal return on the day the index is announced. Now, if I knew how to operate Zoom, I would poll you and ask you, what do you think is the abnormal return for receiving 100? And I'm sure most of you will be right. The abnormal return is significant, both economically and statistically. It's about 15 percentage points. The abnormal return for receiving not quite 100, but just below 100, 99, 98, 85, is actually higher, which is interesting. We can have some post-hoc explanations as to why that is. The abnormal return for receiving any score between 25 and 75, no matter how you slice it, is 0, statistically 0. If you are announced to be a company that is not really not like the best employer or the worst employer, markets don't react. But if you receive a very, very low score, if you are named and shamed as being the ExxonMobil, the Chick-fil-A of LGBTQ diversity, you actually have a positive, significant abnormal return on the day the index is announced. And this is consistent if we slice the data in different years, in different ways. I think I'm gonna skip a slide because I'm gonna show you what is the more convincing version of this. So if you run a financial event study, as Caroline, I'm sure, was going to ask me afterwards, what you want to do is eliminate confounding event, but also eliminate repeated scores. And the idea is that if you were named and shamed to be in, I'm gonna say an ExxonMobil of the gays. If you were named and shamed in 2012, and then you received the same score in 2013, there's no new information there. Same goes for receiving best employer, right? So if we remove these and only talk about firms that received that score for the first time, well, two things. One, the sample size dropped significantly, but the effect size increases significantly as well. It becomes both more economically significant and more statistically significant. This is actually a very large effect in comparison to other event studies. I should say, please talk to us afterwards. This has not been presented much, so we would really like feedback on this. So it seems like firms who receive the lowest scores, 0 to 25, for the first time, so the first time a firm receives a 10, the abnormal return is actually significant and large on the day the index is announced. Let me show you a few more graphs just for the fun of it. 5 minutes, sure. first of all, I wanted to show you the distribution of CI scores over the years. So those of you who are economists would probably not find this surprising at all. Before there was information about this, before there were a nonprofit that, you know, shouted from the rooftops, this company is not doing transgender inclusive something toilets, and this company is doing that. No company received a 0. It actually takes effort to receive a 0. You need to donate money to anti-LGBTQ policies. You need to go through your HR policies and see, oh my God, a same-sex partner can enter the gym. It's costly. No firm receives a 0 in 2002. No firm receives 100 in 2002 either. And then over the years, what you see is more and more firms start receiving higher scores. Until around 2009, where we see firms, and we went and checked this in the data, firms started eliminating HR policies that support same-sex partners from the books. So firms started to actively reduce their score on the index. We can't say that it was with the intent of reducing the score on the index, but we can say that they became less LGBTQ friendly, then removed actively policies. 5% of the companies in the US by the end of the sample had explicit exclusions for bereavement benefit for same-sex partners, which I think is kind of extreme. So this is the first observation. I have 3 minutes, so I want to show you one more thing that I found interesting. So we looked at where these companies do business, and there's a lot of literature on value congruence. So if I think you're a conservative company selling to conservatives, employing conservative employees, I'm probably going to value a position that is quote unquote liberal, that is very pro-LGBT less, and value a position that is more conservative more, and vice versa. So we split the sample to firms that are headquarters or do business in states that are liberal, and you see that in the blue line, and firms that do business that are headquartered in states that are conservative, see this in the red line. The first thing you see is that there seem to be more firms receiving low scores in conservative states, and more firms, much more firms receiving high scores in liberal states. And if you look at the abnormal return for these groups, you see that in conservative states, low scores receive very high abnormal returns, but high scores, it's not significant. And in liberal states, it's the other way around. Firms that receive very high scores, firms that are very LGBTQ friendly, have positive abnormal returns, but it's not significant for low scores in liberal states. All right, I think I rushed through this, but I think I'm more or less got the point through. I have some final thoughts, but I only have less than a minute, so I'm gonna actually I'm gonna put these on the slide, but I would like to point to that last point. When we look at our literature, we have a lot. We've been confounding CSR with certain beliefs sometimes, and there is not a lot of research in our literature. There is some in sociology on the performance implication of explicitly non-liberal policies, pro-religion, anti. You can think of many ideas, and I think that's an interesting avenue to explore. All right, that's basically it. Thank you.